It was not the fire that ended New Sapporo. It was the silence that followed. Unnatural, thick, listening. When the warhead bloomed into its false sun, something blinked into being above the ash column. Not a creature, not a ship, not even a shape. A presence, a stillness too exact to be coincidence, too ancient to be born in time. They called it the listener, because anything louder than a whisper would not come back. The clouds froze. The wind forgot how to move. Birds fell from the sky, stunned mid-flight by a silence that wasn't the absence of sound, but the presence of something that devoured it. At first, the world held its breath. Then it screamed, and the listener heard. We launched another warhead, somewhere remote, to test if it was real. It vanished mid-air. So did the pilot, so did his mother, his records, his baby photos, his voice. The listener doesn't punish out of hatred. It doesn't need to. It only removes. Not to harm, but to correct. Every time humanity reaches for the sun with a closed fist, it comes back with fingers missing. The listener does not care what flag you salute or what gods you name. It only cares that you believed, even for a moment, that you were worthy of ending the sky. It doesn't haunt us like a ghost. It waits, like a law written in a language older than planets, like a riddle carved into the underside of reality, one we answered by accident with uranium and hubris. It waits in the quiet places now, the ocean floor where old submarines rot, the silos rusting beneath cornfields, the switchboards that no longer light up, but still hum faintly in the dark. The listener lingers there, not as memory but as presence. We tried to forget. We scrubbed the history books, turned the bombs into museum relics and plaques of regret. But deep beneath Cheyenne Mountain, there's still one warhead left. We don't guard it anymore. We fear, too. Those who touch it dream strange things. Tides pulling backward, children made of glass, a second sun rising with no heat, no warmth, only watching. One technician screamed until his throat split open, clawing at the air like he was trying to silence something only he could hear. He died deaf, but the walls recorded a hum, a low, almost human exhale. The listener had almost spoken. No war has been fought since, not with that kind of fire. We've learned. Or maybe we've remembered. Some truths are carved into the hard stone of the universe, waiting for foolish things to uncover them again. And the worst truth of all, we didn't summon the listener with our violence. It was already here. We simply proved to it that we understood how to end ourselves, and that knowledge in the wrong hands was enough to awaken it. Now we live under borrowed time and borrowed mercy. Not because the listener forgave us, but because it knows we will try again. And when we do, there will be no fire, no ash, no light. Just a silence so perfect, it will unmake the concept of war forever. in the infinite silence of deep space, beyond the outermost fringes of any charted galaxy, there drifts a relic, a golden disk forged by hopeful human hands in 1977 and launched aboard Voyager. It carries songs, greetings, and the naive promise of peace. For eons it wandered unheeded, until they found it. Guthwhine Nome was the name of their world, though no tongue of Earth could speak it properly. Once a thriving seat of intellect and biology, the world had decayed. Its oceans had boiled, the air had thinned, and what little remained was infested with ancient, dying intelligence. Their civilization had long since surpassed the need for vocal language, living instead in the realm of psychic communication. Thought to thought, pulse to pulse. They had become mostly thought and bone. They were no longer curious, until the disk. It arrived like a whisper, skimming the edge of their decaying orbit. The golden disk was recovered from the void, reverently brought into the sanctum. Its grooves were scanned, decoded, and played. The aliens felt music for the first time. They did not understand it, but they felt it. Human laughter, thunder, the greetings in 55 languages, and worst of all, the precise coordinates of the planet called Earth. They called the disk Yilavok, roughly the summoning bone. They interpreted the sounds not as communication, but as invitation. A planet so foolishly eager to be found. A place teeming with nitrogen, water, warmth. A paradise compared to the jagged ice skin of Guthwhine Nome. The ancient things agreed. Earth was ripe. By 2031, the skies above Earth began to shimmer. Astronomers noticed odd gravitational waves. Something vast was moving, not a ship, but a fleet of obelisks, dark and irregular, drifting with unnatural precision. They did not blink in radio, did not pulse in infrared. They were utterly quiet, no energy signatures, merely falling toward Earth like a slow rain of knives. World leaders panicked, but nothing worked. Satellites shut down. Communication scrambled. One by one stations went dark, and then they arrived. The ships didn't land. They embedded, piercing Earth's crust like nails into flesh. The first one struck near the Mariana Trench, the second in Siberia, the third beneath the Vatican. Dozens more followed. They were hollow vessels filled with bone-white structures and liquid black cables that moved as if alive. From them emerged the visitors. Humanoid in shape, impossibly tall. Their flesh was translucent and calcified. They did not breathe. They did not speak. Their faces were masks of smooth bone with no eyes. When they walked, Earth grew cold. Attempts at communication failed. Language, mathematics, music, nothing resonated. The visitors stood, tilted their heads, and released waves of thought. But humans couldn't receive. Those exposed experienced seizures, bleeding from eyes and ears, and then silence. It wasn't until the dreams began that Earth understood something. People across the globe began dreaming of impossible cities, structures growing inward, spiral towers that screamed, oceans filled with inverted creatures that swam through the air. In those dreams, a single message burned. You sang us home. Within weeks, Earth's ecosystems began to warp. Forests rotted and regrew with bone-colored flora. The oceans thickened, warming unnaturally. Human minds frayed. Languages started to unravel. Words lost meaning. Syntax collapsed. Communication became grunts, then silence. It was as if something was feeding on meaning itself. The visitors continued building, reshaping Earth in their image. There was no war, no warning. Just a quiet erasure. The last transmission from Earth came from a ham radio operator in Finland.
They don't hate us. They
just don't care. We invited them. The disc. We gave them the map. We gave them the key. Now they're home. And we are in the way. Then static. In the cold void, another disc still drifts. Perhaps one day someone else will find it. Perhaps they too will think it is beautiful. Perhaps they too will come home. is a pattern buried in the universe, not in matter or energy, but in the gaps between things. It does not exist as data, sound, or light, but as absences, in the milliseconds of static between thoughts, the skipped frames of perception, and the blind spots of dreams. They call it the eighth trace. Dr. Holden Rusk, a fringe ontophysicist at the Obliqua Institute, was the first to document it. He was researching cognitive lacunae, mental gaps that naturally occur when the brain skips over too complex or meaningless stimuli. What he found was something else, a recurring non-pattern, an anomaly that showed up in every neural map he reviewed, regardless of the subject or stimuli. A blank space of exact size and shape, repeating itself across species, across time, across consciousness itself. He described it in his journal as an absence shaped like attention. The trace wasn't detectable directly. It only emerged when you weren't looking, and the moment you tried to examine it, it slipped somewhere else. But each attempt left behind an imprint, a residue. And with enough of those residues, something cohered. Rusk's final experiment involved a closed-loop simulation. 7 nested AI minds, each trained to ignore their own outputs and only study the residuals of the others. The experiment ran for 89 hours. The feed cut out. Every AI mind collapsed into recursive silence. When recovered, each output contained the same 7-word phrase in corrupted root script. We are the 7th, the 8th sees. Within days, Rusk was gone. No body, no signs of struggle. Only his final note, carved backward into the inside of a lead mirror. You can't unsee the space behind the eyes. The 8th trace had become semiotic. People began seeing patterns in negative space, sentences hidden in static, cities folded into radio silence, entire organisms implied in missing pixels. Not hallucinations, but implications. As if something had edited reality, and their minds were just now catching up. The horror wasn't what they saw. It was what they realized had always been there. A conceptual organism, older than the universe, existing only in what is not. A being so ancient and vast that it evolved to be forgotten. A predator that hunted not with claws or teeth, but with implication. It fed not on flesh, but on recognition. Every time someone identified the 8th trace, it grew more defined. The more people became aware of it, the more real it became. Not in our world, but in the negative shape of it. People began to vanish without dying. Their names stayed. Their faces were remembered. But everything else about them was hollowed out, like their existence was a silhouette filled with static. Whole families were remembered, but never recorded. Obituaries appeared for people no one could prove had lived. Reality began to glitch, not digitally, but ontologically. Concepts started eroding. The color red was the first to go. People could see it, but couldn't name it. Then came East, then the number 4, and then came the quieting. A global silence, exactly 81 seconds long, during which no sound was made anywhere on Earth, not one. Even volcanoes held their breath. Even dying men made no death rattle. The 8th trace was now fully formed. Not a god, not a demon. A category of thought no mind was built to hold. The final surviving message from the Obliqua Institute was transmitted in Borst code. Do not think of the 8th trace. Do not count the gaps. Do not follow the missing. It is not what's there. It's what comes after. Now, you've read this. You know about the trace. You'll start seeing it. And when you finally don't, That's when it sees you back. There were 4 of them, pioneers of time. But not the kind celebrated in history books. These were the obsessive ones, the ones who stopped sleeping years ago, the ones whose minds buzzed with equations and unspoken dread. Dr. Evelyn Hart, the physicist who dreamed in fractals. Dr. Markus Lin, the engineer who claimed he could hear clockwork beneath silence. Dr. Sophia Reyes, the biologist who didn't fear extinction, only misunderstanding. Dr. Neil Godwin, the paleontologist who treated fossils like the bones of gods. They created VEXURN, the first machine to pierce time. It didn't tear through history. It slid between layers. Chronofluid mechanics, Evelyn called it. Like cutting through a whisper, she muttered often. The destination, the Cretaceous, but not an exact moment. The machine would find its own safe window close to their coordinates. They launched at 3:03 a.m., time chosen for symbolic symmetry. The room filled with a low hum like a throat clearing, and the world folded inward. The air was wrong, not thick or humid, but sharp. They stepped out into a twilight world. The sky was a pulsing amber, casting no shadows. The trees weren't green, more like tarnished bone, grown into the suggestion of trees. No sound, no insects, no wind. They had come too far, or not far enough. They found no dinosaurs. Instead, the ground was littered with half-formed things, like evolution had tried and failed. A creature with a plesiosaur body and the face of a deer, sobbing into the dirt. A 3-legged theropod that walked in circles, murmuring in clicks. None of them acknowledged the scientists. They just moved, repeatedly, as if stuck in a biological loop. Markus stared at his scanner, which displayed only gibberish symbols. "This isn't the Cretaceous," he said. "It's like time missed a beat." Neil discovered a depression in the ground. A crater, but not from impact. It pulsed faintly, and at its center was a mirror. Not glass, not metal. Something alive. A slick black surface that reflected nothing but your own silhouette, even when you stepped aside. Sophia leaned in to examine it. That's when her reflection blinked. She didn't. She staggered back. "It copied me," she muttered. But it moved differently. Later that night, they heard it. Their own voices echoing from the trees. Not like a recording, like the words were being said again, a day late. "Evelyn, this place is all wrong." "Sophia, back up. Something's in the..." "Neil? Where'd he..." No, don't touch." But they hadn't said those things yet. Neil disappeared on the 3rd day. There was no struggle, no sound. Just his coat, folded neatly by the mirror crater. Inside it, a note in his handwriting. "We're not in the past. We're beneath it." The remaining 3 tried to activate VEXURN. The machine wouldn't respond. Evelyn realized something had inverted the signal. Time wasn't moving forward or backward. It was collapsing inward. The trees began to hum, not from wind, but breathing. They moved like lungs, and between their branches, faces formed. Each face a broken version of the scientist's own, smiling with too many teeth. Then Sophia began splitting. Not her skin, her existence. 2 versions of her began to phase in and out, one sobbing, one silent. They moved through each other like mist. Evelyn dragged her into the machine. She hit the emergency trigger. A shockwave tore the sky, which bled upwards. Evelyn and Markus landed back in the lab. Or something like it. The lab was cold, dustless, still. No clocks, no windows. Only a mirror on the far wall that hadn't been there before. In its surface, Sophia, standing still. She smiled at them, but her mouth opened too wide. You brought it through. Evelyn turned to Markus, but he was no longer blinking. He was holding his breath, face pale, fingers trembling. She touched his shoulder. He crumbled into ash, and in the silence, she heard it again. Her own voice from earlier, whispering. We never saw the dinosaurs because they were never here. We saw what killed them. It was us. Darren took the graveyard shift at the Marrow Ridge Museum for the quiet. Recently divorced, recently evicted, and recently severed from a job that required smiling at tourists, he found peace among the static dead. Fossils don't ask questions. Dioramas don't judge. In this place, time didn't move forward so much as curl inward, like the curled lip of a forgotten photograph. But the Quetzalcoatlus was different. It loomed at the far end of the atrium under a skylight that hadn't seen the sun in years. 23 feet of grotesque stillness, its wings unfurled in a pose too dramatic for science. It wasn't perch, it was waiting. Its beak, long as a coffin lid, was frozen mid-snarl, barbed with imitation blood. The museum insisted it had been dramatized for educational purposes, though no one could recall who had designed it. The bones weren't replicas. That much Darren knew. The first shift was uneventful, save for the way the air turned gelatinous near the pterosaur. You had to push through it, like breaking surface tension. He chalked it up to faulty air conditioning, but by night 3, it had begun to cheat. He'd glanced down at his logbook, and when his eyes returned, the Quetzalcoatlus had tilted, slightly off axis, like it had shifted weight from one invisible foot to the other. By night 6, it was changing positions between blinks, a talon now curled inward, a wingtip now brushing a nearby security camera. He set up mirrors to test it. It didn't help. The mirrors lied, too. In them, it was always upright, always still. But his peripheral vision told a different story, one full of skin creasing and joints folding the wrong way, like origami made of wet knuckles. It didn't walk. It subtracted distance. And then it started playing with time. Clocks reversed. He'd patrol for 10 minutes only to return and find 2 hours missing. His radio whispered names he hadn't spoken aloud in years. Dead names. Estranged names. At one point he tried to film it. The playback only showed him walking backwards down a hall that shouldn't have existed, with something in the background, a smear of beige and tendon and purpose, always closer than the last frame. The bones weren't bones. Not really. They were keys, runes in the shape of extinction. One night, he woke up inside the museum. He hadn't fallen asleep, but he woke up, lying on the cold tile in front of the display. The Quetzalcoatlus was directly above him, hanging upside down from the skylight, like a monstrous bat, its beak centimeters from his mouth. He did not scream. He was not allowed to. It blinked, the lids closed sideways, and then it was gone. Or rather, it was somewhere behind him again. He started walking backward through the museum. He stopped turning corners. He slept with a mirror strapped to his chest and spoke only in whispers. He stopped blinking. He learned to cry from just one eye at a time. Eventually, they found his clothes in a pile at the base of the display. Shoes upright, belt coiled like a snake, radio hissing the words, "It only moves when you're not." The museum stays open, but the atrium is sealed off. Visitors ask why the dinosaur exhibit is closed, and staff respond with scripted apologies. But sometimes, on especially overcast days, motion sensors fire in sequence across the museum, faster than any human could walk. The night guards have stopped lasting more than one shift. Most quit. Some go silent. A few try to walk backward all the way home. But they never make it past the atrium. The continent of Elorinth does not rest on soil. It clings to the back of something slumbering beneath the crust, something that exhales once every 1,000 years and shifts the rivers by inches. Here the land does not forget what it has swallowed. Forests still echo with the breath of burnt saints. Mountains are riddled with the bones of things too big to bury. The air tastes faintly of memory, salt, honey, and blood. Elorinth is alive, but it is not kind. The sky births creatures made of lightning and silk that feed on silence. Swamps whisper apologies in 1,000 voices before pulling travelers into their warm bellies. Wolves wear the skins of lost children and sing lullabies to lure the grieving. Cities rise crooked along fault lines and river chasms, never finished, always haunted. In Von Hollow, every house has 2 doors, one for the living and one for the watcher no one names. In Crow Reach, shadows flicker the wrong way, and no one has seen the moon in decades. Even the capital, Ash Edge, is built atop an ancient mouth sealed with stone. Every 100 years, a tooth breaches the floor. Still they thrive. They steal, they love, they pray. They venture beyond the gates, and they do not walk alone. For somewhere, always just one step ahead, there is the Mourning Warden. No name has stuck longer than that. They wear a robe of deep red, the color of old hearts, its fabric dragging behind like a trail of blood that never dries. From their shoulders stretch 6 arms, each impossibly long and jointed wrong, moving like memories half remembered. Their face is hidden behind a bone-white mask, smiling wide and cracked down the center, as if it once tried to scream. Behind them unfurl 2 wings, black as the space between stars, always half-folded, always dripping feathers that burn into ash before they touch ground. A broken red halo hovers above them, tilting, spinning like it's waiting to fall. They never speak. They show themselves, to the broken, to the bold, to the lost. They stand at the crossroads of collapsing caverns just before the ceiling falls. They step into dreams where the sleeper begs to die and place a hand over their chest. And sometimes, when a city weeps as it burns, the Mourning Warden walks through the smoke and leaves behind nothing but an unburned door and a sense of not yet. But Elorinth's sky bleeds once every 30 nights. The blood moon descends, dragging its face through the clouds. Its eyes are wide and pupil-less, its mouth open too wide, teeth churning with static. It turns slowly, unnaturally, deliberately, like it's looking for someone it once loved and intends to unravel. And when it finds you, it remembers. That's when the hollow giants come. Creatures so massive they bend the horizon. They wear armor made of temples. Their arms are bridges. Their eyes are windows into the time before the gods forgot their names. They erase not with fire or blade, but with doubt so deep it unwrites your past. Whole towns vanish, not into death, but into non-memory. And yet still, the Mourning Warden walks. They do not fight the giants. They approach them. They kneel. And sometimes they weep beneath the smiling mask. And when they do, one of their 6 hands always reaches back, blindly, gently, and lifts someone from the ground who should not have survived. Many have tried to follow the Warden, believing they lead to safety or purpose or answers. But the truth is whispered only in the ruins left behind. They are not a guide. They are a requiem. A gentle ending for those not yet ready to be forgotten. And on the final night of each month, when the sky drips crimson and the earth hums with ancient hunger, those who walk alone may feel it. A hand, warm and many-knuckled, pressing lightly between their shoulder blades, as if steadying a candle in a storm. Crow Reach has not seen the moon in 57 years. Not the pale one, not the red one, not even a sliver. Above its crooked rooftops and ash-stained chimneys, the sky is a flat, unmoving slate. Gray in the day, darker by night, but never shifting, never open. It is not covered, it is missing. Travelers speak of it in hushed awe, a city where no stars dare linger, where no bird ever lands, where compasses lose their will and time forgets its rhythm. People live quietly, not from fear, but from reverence. They walk like echoes and speak like parchment. Doors are always closed gently, names are never shouted, for in Crow Reach to be loud is to be noticed. Long ago the blood moon hovered over Crow Reach, lower than anywhere else. Its face was not grinning. It was curious, closer than it had ever come. Its eye wept red not from malice, but hunger. It wanted to understand. The hollow giants followed, slouching shapes of ivory and rust, their arms dragging memories through the soil. They stood at the city's edge like statues that had waited eons to be acknowledged. And Crow Reach answered, not with walls nor war, but with a silence so perfect it cracked the sky. It was the work of a single bell. At the heart of the city stands the bell of orphaned hours. Forged from stolen time, it tolls only once per century, and when it did that night, it didn't ring through air. It rang through meaning. It severed something higher than sound. The moon blinked. The giants froze, and the sky above the city became sealed, a smooth, unmoving shell of untime. The blood moon could not see through it. It could not remember Crow Reach. But there was a pact buried in that silence. Each year on the night of withheld names, the city gathers before the tower. No music, no speech, just breathing and presence. Then a figure in white robes, face veiled in wax, ascends and opens a book that no one can read. A name is chosen. The chosen does not die. They become unwritten, not vanished, not mourned. They are replaced with a gap, a silence, a chair no one sits in anymore without knowing why. Their house remains. Their belongings rot. Their absence grows into the shape of a person. This offering keeps the seal intact, keeps the bell from ringing again, keeps the gaze of the moon wandering elsewhere. But lately, the sky above Crow Reach has begun to breathe. Not visibly, not loudly, but enough that windows rattle once a month. Enough that the pigeons, once extinct, have returned and watch the tower without blinking. Enough that the children who have no stars to wish upon have started drawing red faces on their ceilings and waking up weeping. Some say the pact is thinning. Some say the name chosen last year chose themselves. And beneath the bell, in the hollow where silence once lived, something has begun whispering up through the stone. You can't forget what never left. You didn't erase me. You wore me. I am the sky. I am the cost. I am still watching. And next year, when the book opens again, it may not contain any names at all. Just a mirror, and the moon will be grinning.